All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's meeting. It's nice to see everyone again. I know we were on a little break for the month of July due to the Summer Policy Summit. Today's meeting is going to be on local coordination with public utility commissions on transportation and electrification, and we have a great set of speakers for you today. First, we'll have Cher Griffith from the Electrification Coalition, and she coordinates the Climate Mayor's EV purchasing program. And then we have Castro from the city of Orlando, Florida, and Maty Sauter from the city of Portland, Oregon. So I'll go ahead and kick it off to Chris to get us started. I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh, sorry, not Cher. Cher first. Sorry about that. And we'll have Cher go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'll start sharing my screen now. Hope everybody can see that. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As Jasmine said, my name is Cher Griffith. I really appreciate the opportunity to address you all today. I work on the programs team at the Electrification Coalition. And I guess real quick, I guess I'm interested in the Rivian, the RT2, I think. That's the one I'm most excited about. Ambitious, yes, we know. So I work at the Electrification Coalition. I'm on the programs team, and my work primarily involves assisting municipal governments to plan for, procure, and deploy electric vehicles. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about one of the specific programs I work on, the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative, and how I help support data-driven decision-making by public fleets. And then just a bit about the Electrification Coalition. It's a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit group. We are solely focused on facilitating the mass deployment of electric vehicles. So we work on a number of different projects and programs around the United States to increase EV uptake and support successful EV deployment by fleets. Programs such as the Smart Columbus, the City of Atlanta Partnership, the EV Accelerator communities in New York and Colorado. We're currently working on the DC Transportation Electrification Roadmap and other programs. And we're also involved in some state policy work. But as I said, this program, the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative, it's called the Collaborative for short. It's a partnership designed to support climate action by deploying electric vehicles on public fleets. So that would be mostly local governments, counties, townships, boroughs, some state engagement as well. The Climate Mayors it's a partnership. The Climate Mayors commits to take action to reduce emissions within their cities. Sourcewell is a collaborative procurement agency serving public entities, and the Electrification Coalition really is the glue that connects the two together. We provide technical assistance to support fleet electrification outside of just procurement. And just very quickly on our program, which started in late 2018 with only 25 committed fleets. We are currently at over 265 committed and engaged municipalities. They have committed to purchasing over 4,500 electric vehicles, and they've procured over 2,800 so far and deployed over 1,300 charging stations. And so that's like a key metric is the ratio of electric vehicles to chargers, because we engage with a lot of cities at different points in their fleet electrification journey. And usually they start out thinking, they want like a one vehicle to one charger ratio because everybody's paranoid about losing range and cars being stranded. But we've been able to really provide enough best practices and case studies and really those connections to peers in cities to help them prove the point that, a one-to-one vehicle to charger ratio is really unnecessary in most cases. Just very quickly, these are some slides from Sourcewell, our procurement partner. They make all their competitively sourced contracts from major auto and charging station manufacturers available to public fleets for them to use free of cost. And so they have a number of electric vehicles currently available on our website, which is driveevfleets.org. And this selection is changing all the time. Of course, we are very highly anticipating the Nissan Ariya coming out. We have some other other 2022 models, and I think some 2021s as well. And Sourcewell also makes their charging station contracts available from a number of the different most popular charging station manufacturers, as you can see here. And also, we're able to offer school buses to public school districts from Lion Electric, Thomas Built, Bluebird, IC Bus. These are pretty major school bus manufacturers who have provided electric options. Something that we've been very pleased to add to our collection last year is medium and heavy duty options for electric vehicles. So garbage trucks, trucks in classes 6 through class 8, litter vacuums, again, like these big medium and heavy duty vehicles. Many of the major suppliers you see here are providing electric options. So happy to provide that as well to municipalities. Sourcewell is the collaborative's procurement partner, and my colleagues and I at the Electrification Coalition, we lead with outreach to local governments, and we provide technical staff support. We connect municipalities to the collaborative's knowledge sharing network of engaged fleets. We share best practices, case studies, and most importantly, we help fleets analyze their current fleet stock and make recommendations and provide guidance on how they can start fleet electrification or complete or advance fleet electrification. So analysis sets the basis for data-driven decision-making when it comes to fleet electrification. Fleet analysis consists of reviewing the fleet inventory to understand which vehicles are in the fleet, how much it costs to fuel, operate, and maintain these vehicles, and determine emissions profiles. To better assist cities on their way to transitioning their fleet vehicles to electric, the EC has developed a tool to analyze and compare these data points to available EV models in order to make recommendations on EVs that can suitably replace them. So I'm talking about the dashboard for rapid vehicle electrification, the drive tool. It was developed by the EC along with Atlas Public Policy. The drive tool is designed to analyze fleet inventory data across light, medium, and heavy duty vehicle classes in a matter of minutes. The tool analyzes vehicles in your fleet, calculates total operating costs, and make recommendations on EVs that can replace each vehicle based on operational savings. So the primary inputs for the dashboard include the vehicle identification numbers. That's like very key to this whole experience. Annual vehicle mileages for vehicles in the fleet and expected vehicle retirement age if known. Really, we just need the vehicle identification numbers. The other data points, we have some default values that we can use, but of course, custom data points are encouraged. You can upload this data in Excel format, or Excel spreadsheet, or in CVS files. If you can get the per vehicle average maintenance costs, that can be very helpful as well, but we can use averages or defaults. And also if you have information on average gasoline, diesel, and electricity prices, that's also really key to the drive tool's total cost of ownership analysis. And our analysis also pulls data from the Federal Highway Administration, the Department of Energy, and the EPA. This includes information on new electric vehicles as they become available. And this is an extensively customizable tool. So the tool generates lifetime and per mile cost averages comparing conventional vehicles and EVs by model and use case. So sedans versus light duty pickup trucks versus delivery vans versus school buses, etc. The drive tool also shows near-term EV procurement opportunities based on lifetime savings, although it's still important to do a qualitative analysis to ensure that the recommended EVs meet the original vehicle's duty cycle. So, we can just get the fleet inventory from the fleet manager, but it's also very important to actually speak to the fleet manager, to speak to his team, and to learn more about exactly how each vehicle is used to make sure that the recommendations really match up with the use case. And so the drive tool shows average lifetime greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant emissions of fleet vehicles, and you can compare with specific EV models, or you can view emissions averages for entire vehicle classes. And again, drive is modular, so it's extensively customizable. And I'm going to show you well, we're just going to go through the process first. As I said, you just got to load the data, the fleet vehicle inventory in a spreadsheet format. Then we have to, once the data is loaded into the tool, you're going to map the vehicles from the selected EV models. So for example, Drive can do this automatically, but it shows you a screen where you can customize each vehicle mapping. So for many of the fleets that we work with, some of them want only electric vehicles. They're only interested in EV options that are currently available, but some will be open to, but I think Drive does plug-in hybrid electric vehicles as well. But you can, again, very customizable tool. And then you can, then you can set other custom market options, such as any rebate amounts that are available to you, whether you're planning to use cash or loan procurement. You can add the fuel or electricity rates, or you can put in a specific charger to vehicle ratio if you want. Again, we have a lot of defaults, but again, it's very customizable. So if you have a specific scenario you'd like to think through, the Drive tool is really powerful at presenting those insights. And then you run the analysis. It can take a couple of minutes, depending on the size of your fleet, and then you view the results. And so this is just one of the graphs that kind of demonstrate the powerful insights that we can get using the Drive tool. You can, the fleet analysis under consideration here, it consists of pickup trucks, school buses, vans, and work trucks. And then the Drive tool compares the internal combustion and electric vehicle options for each of these vehicle use cases. And so the Drive tool builds the cost for each vehicle by stacking the different price elements on top of each other. So you can see like the blue, that is depreciation. Of course, for electric vehicles, that's like the highest component of the per mile cost. And then I think fuel is maintenance costs. So electric vehicles really come in advantageous there compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. And then I think the gray is fuel costs. So again, electricity really outweighs diesel or gasoline in that in each instance. But other costs are shown as well: financing, any taxes or fees, the cost of carbon. All of these are added into the view by default, but as you can kind of see by this graph, like none of them really have any measurable impact. I guess for this fleet, when we ran it, all those values were null, but you can always add all of those data points to the tool. And I'm pretty much out of time, but I hope that was a good overview of what the Drive tool has to offer. Happy to connect with you, the commissioners, or any of the municipalities that you are liaising with who might be interested in using the tool. And here's my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to end my slideshow and pass it back to Jasmine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cher. And now we'll have Chris. Oops, it's a long question that I just elevated.
Make sure to unmute myself, and then I think we should be good to go. Perfect. Thank you, Jasmine, and the NARUC EV Working Group members for the invitation and for joining us today this afternoon. I'm really excited to share some insights with you on how Orlando and really cities across the United States are beginning to get future ready for electric vehicles. And hopefully this provides some insights from a regulator's perspective on how you all can help to enable more of this adoption across our states and across our country. Before I do start, I did want to recognize the Florida Department of Transportation and the recent EVMP. It's an electric vehicle master plan that was recently published and submitted to the governor's desk. And I think it has some really excellent suggestions on what public service commissions could be doing to accelerate more EVs, of course, specific here to Florida, but I think there are some relevant things across the country as well. So as was mentioned, my name is Chris Castro. I serve as our Mayor Buddy Dyer's senior advisor on energy, environment, resilience, climate-related efforts, and I direct an Office of Sustainability and Resilience here in the city of Orlando. And we've been working on this topic for quite some time. Mayor Dyer launched Greenworks Orlando as the brand of this effort back in 2007 with the ultimate goal of transitioning Orlando to being one of the most environmentally friendly, socially equitable, and inclusive and economically vibrant cities in the United States. And as part of that, we've not just made this an initiative of the mayor, but we've actually made this a permanent effort of the city of Orlando in establishing this Office of Sustainability and Resilience. This office essentially acts as an in-house consulting firm that really works across our departments and divisions and across the external community to really infuse this culture of sustainability throughout our entire region. And as you can see there on the bottom left, we focus on these 7 key areas of urban sustainability, with electric and alternative transportation being a very important pillar of our approach. We have, as many cities, as you're starting to realize, are making major commitments to moving towards a zero carbon economy by the year of 2050. This is the scientific consensus of where we need to move, not only the United States, but the world. And in order to do that, well, we can't manage what we're not measuring. A lot of cities are beginning to do greenhouse gas emissions inventories, basically carbon footprint calculations of how many emissions they're contributing and where are those as it relates to the sectors of the economy. As you can see here, we've been tracking this, our emissions profile since 2007 when we launched Greenworks. And on the right-hand side, you see kind of a pie chart that helps better break down where those are coming from. The majority of our emissions in Orlando are actually coming from buildings and the energy used in buildings. But about 27% of the overall profile for Orlando is on-road vehicles and the emissions associated with that. So we know that transportation is a big piece in moving towards that zero carbon future, a cleaner, a healthier, a more resilient future for our city and our residents. And Orlando is fortunate to be selected as part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. It's a cohort of 25 cities across the country, some of the largest municipalities that are working to develop these replicable models of policies, programs, partnerships to really move towards that zero carbon future. And you can see here that the 4 key areas really center in around energy efficiency, reducing building energy use. I know you all talk a lot about that in your roles. Also decarbonizing the electric grid, ramping up renewables. And the last 2 do center around transportation, reducing VMTs and encouraging more alternative transportation programs. And lastly, electrify everything. Our vehicles and our buildings really need to start to be moving towards electricity focused energy. So with that, transportation is a big area of our focus. Of course, we have a transportation department in the city, and most cities do, that work on transportation engineering and transportation planning and streets and so on and so forth. The role that we play in the Office of Sustainability is thinking about what types of policies, ordinances, and programs can we enable to really move us towards a more sustainable transportation and mobility future. So part of that certainly is zero emission vehicles and electric vehicles being a big primary focus of ours. We've been working with several different offices and departments, including the National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, and our Florida Office of Energy and Consumer Services to really project what the impact is going to be for Florida and across the country. And there are a lot of projections out there. There's a lot of still uncertainty about where things are headed, but we do know that we're basically at the beginning of what might be the greatest transformation in transportation that we've seen in over 100 years. And in Orlando, we're expecting between 10% and 30% of new vehicles sold to be electric by the year 2030. And so we're really trying to plan, how do we get ahead of that from a city's perspective, knowing that these buildings that are being built today are going to be around for 50, 60, 70 plus years. How do we start to get the infrastructure ready for what we know is inevitably coming and is going to be a more equitable, more cost-effective way to get around town? So as I mentioned, Orlando and cities across the country are trying to figure out, what does this ecosystem look like? How are we enabling from policy perspective, from a programs perspective? And I wanted to run through a couple of these key areas in the short time that I have with you. One of them is leading by example, and cities are beginning to look at their own fleets as a way to make this transition and indicate to the market that we're serious about moving away from fossil fuels that are polluting our communities and our planet and moving towards cleaner mobility solutions. Orlando has about 3,000 vehicles within our overall municipal fleet. That's light, medium, and heavy duty combined. And our goal is to move to 100% alternative and electric vehicles, alternative fuel and electric vehicles by 2030. And so currently we have over 200 of these plug-in electric vehicles within our city fleet. And it's great that Cher went before me because we've worked very closely with the Electrification Coalition over the number of years to get us ready for our city, to get us ready for this transition. And we have worked with them on this, them and the Atlas team on the drive tool to do a fleet electrification study. And we did that across our entire fleet. Very eye-opening in terms of what departments we felt could easily transition to an EV without essentially reducing any of the services or mission that they're providing to the public. And we also have used the EV Purchasing Collaborative through the Climate Mayors Network in order to procure over 60 different electric vehicles, from Nissan Leafs to Chevy Bolts. We even, as you can see there in the bottom right, we've been working on building out our police motorcycle fleet to be zero emission as well. And so that's a zero motorcycle that are used for races and rallies and, you know, public events. And they're a fantastic alternative to you know, gas guzzling Harley Davidson bike, so to speak. We, in addition to our own city fleet, are working closely with our transit authority. We have a regional transportation authority here in Central Florida that covers 3 counties, of which City of Orlando is smack in the middle and the largest municipality of. And so one of the things we've been doing is working with Lynx to make this transition a reality for them as well. They've also committed to 100% electric and alternative fuel by 2030, which is in alignment with the city's goal. And specifically in downtown Orlando, we have a BRT, a bus rapid transit system that's underwritten completely by the city. It's a service that we provide to residents and visitors of our downtown. It's several miles of free bus, dedicated bus guideways around the city, going into some of our transit dependent neighborhoods as well. And our goal has been to convert that to 100% electric, zero emission buses by 2025. I'm happy to say that we've been able to secure some federal LONO grants and a 5339 bus and bus facilities grant through the FTA, and are now on track of hitting that goal by the end of 2022. We currently have 8 of these electric buses in operations. We're working with our utility on a unique business model that allows them to land the charging infrastructure and even have ownership of the battery in the bus when it comes up to a useful life, and therefore be able to use that mobile battery as a stationary storage at their substations and other locations to harden their own grid and provide grid services across the region. So we're getting creative here about these business models, and I do think that regulatory bodies like yourselves play a really important role in accelerating bus electrification, specifically because of the challenges that often transit agencies have with, you know, fiscal resources and the like. So something to think about further. Electrification Coalition in Orlando have actually also collaborated on one of America's first rental car programs for electric vehicles. And in 2015, launched this program. Of course, Orlando being one of the most visited cities, not just in America, but the world, we saw an opportunity of being the test ride city of America. As people come here from all over the place, how can they get into an EV and maybe for the first time experience what an electric vehicle looks like? So when they go back to their own homes, they make that vehicle decision later. And luckily, we partnered with our hoteliers, with our theme parks, Disney, Universal, SeaWorld, all of these groups who committed to landing charging infrastructure and actually providing additional perks, valet parking at no cost if you're a part of this program and things of that nature. So pretty cool program. Of course, we're looking to ramp this back up now that, hopefully we're seeing a different future post-COVID and more vehicle models that are out there to take advantage of. Last couple of things here. We've been focused a lot on charging infrastructure. We know that it is the chicken to the egg scenario, right? What comes first? How are we going to get ahead and create a marketplace that people feel reliable in moving into an EV? And so this is kind of a map of Central Florida. You can see at the top right there, that's the Orlando market that we're talking about. And we have actually earlier this year unveiled an additional 100 new level 2 charging stations across the city on public property. This is at neighborhood centers, parking garages, public venues, on-street parking, parks, and really trying to do two things. One, support our city fleets that are moving towards electric so that they have reliable places to charge at their work sites. And two, provide additional charging for the public and for our visitors. And so it really worked out well. One of the big challenges, and I'd say lessons learned, was how we dealt with ADA accessibility. There is not any federal or state requirements to date that we're aware of that require ADA accessibility when landing this EV charging infrastructure. And there's a lot of question marks about what is required and what isn't. Hopefully US DOT and our state regulators will start to clarify that as we start to scale, you know, what the president's looking to do, 500,000 new stations. We got to get that right. But as you can see here in each one of these photos, we've been able to create an accessible EV space at every location that we landed these chargers around the city. 33 different sites. Every location has at least one ADA accessible EV space. And that is the minimum standard that we are going to be moving forward with as we expand more charging infrastructure. We're working on a downtown recharge hub, right? These DC fast charging rapid hubs. We won a grant from the VW settlement funding and are in the construction now to build one of America's, if not America's largest non-Tesla DC fast charging hubs in the country. I think the largest one right now is 11 stalls in New York that are non-Tesla. These will be 22, so doubling up to 350 kW chargers as well. And we'll have all 4 major ports. So any vehicle that's out there, including a Tesla, including any others, will be able to charge at this site. And it's right in downtown Orlando. We're very excited about this coming live later this year. Cities are starting to think about ways to encourage our residents to get into EVs, and so we're hosting ride and drive events. I got to recognize our local utility, OUC, who's been an incredible partner of ours in many respects as it relates to EVs. But this is a photo of us tag teaming one of our ride and drive events that we held. We even have a $50 Visa gift card for every resident that's an OUC customer, and they go on a test ride of an EV that they drive, they get to take home a $50 Visa gift card. We're really encouraging the market. We even during COVID pivoted to this virtual video series where we had the mayor and other residents in our community actually go on their own kind of 2 to 3 minute little EV ride and share their experience. Highly encourage you to check out those videos, especially the one of the mayor. I think he did a really good job explaining his reasons. And then dealerships. One thing we've realized is that the sales reps at these dealerships are in the driver's seat, pun intended, in choosing what car they want to sell you. And I've experienced this when I went to go get my first plug-in vehicle. I had to literally sell the sales rep why I wanted the EV. And they were trying to pull me in different directions. And so we have to move in a different direction. And we've now created with OUC and Electrification Coalition a new program called the Electrify Dealership Program, where dealerships can sign up. They have to provide data every month in terms of the number of EVs they're selling. They have to have at least 2 of their sales reps go through a training program, right? Plug in America training. And then in addition, residents that come out to their dealerships to do a test ride also take home that $50 Visa gift card. So we have financial incentives to the sales rep and financial incentives to the resident. We're trying to play that matchmaker to move the needle hard. The last slide that I have here is a very exciting news that I want to share, that last Monday, so a little over a week ago, our city council officially approved our next big climate policy around EVs, and that is an EV Readiness Code. Many cities are starting to require minimum levels of new parking to be built with either EV charging stations installed or the electrical infrastructure that allows us to more cost effectively add charging infrastructure later down the line. And as you can see here, what was passed is for any commercial development, office building, retail, whatever it might be, 2% of new parking has to have installed chargers, 10% has to be capable with enough electrical capacity upon construction, and the empty raceway conduit to those future parking spaces. So all you have to do is add a breaker, run the wire, install that pedestal, and you're ready to go, versus a lot of the additional cost that goes if you're not ready. And then multifamily, knowing that the majority of charging happens at home, 80 to 90% plus, we wanted to increase the capable components to 20% capable for that. And it was, back and forth of an interesting negotiation with developers, but ultimately this is ensuring an equitable access across our community for any resident as we move forward, that they'll have access to this EV charging infrastructure, and we won't create another digital divide issue as this technology begins to accelerate. So with that, Jasmine, I'll turn it back over to you, and I think we'll go to our next speaker. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. And now I'll pull up Maty, who will be speaking next.
I'm on mute, and I'm also not super familiar with the Zoom platform. So just a moment while I open this up. Can that be seen?
Yes.
Yep, that's great.
All right, so I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm standing in for Ingrid Fish, who is with the City of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. My name is Maty Sauter. I run something called the Division of Asset Management for the City of Portland, and that's our facility organization and our fleet organization. So all of the buildings and pieces of equipment for the city. I actually have a background in electricity. I came to the city from working for 7 years at Portland General Electric. So I feel like that's been a little bit of a benefit to the city in terms of expediting its EV conversion programs, because I do have a fair amount of familiarity with utility programs, utility management, and the regulatory process. So I'm actually kind of excited to speak to you guys today because I feel like this is my bread and butter, at least in a past life. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about City of Portland's Green Fleet conversion overview and try and give a little bit of a perspective that frankly was new to me coming to the city, of what is it that customers are experiencing when they're trying to achieve these conversion processes. I would say when I was at the utility, I had a lot of theoretical understanding of what customers are going through. And now as the owner effectively of one of the largest municipal fleets in the state, I have a much more empathetic understanding of what customers are really experiencing. And I do want to commend actually Eric Sherman, I know is on the call. He is with the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and he was just a phenomenal partner helping us glue together our program in a space where I think, frankly, it's fairly hard to innovate. So I want to talk a little bit about our conversion plan overall. I'm going to be frank with you about challenges and opportunities that I think municipalities are experiencing as I really try to make this happen in real time. And then also highlight a few things that I think helped us achieve a fairly successful negotiation and collaboration in a space where, historically things could have been potentially antagonistic with the regulator and the utility. I think we had a successful collaboration recently, and so I wanted to share a little bit about that. So back to the city and an overview of our organization. So City of Portland, we own and operate 3,600 vehicles and pieces of equipment. So we are by far the largest municipal fleet in the state of Oregon, and I actually think we're the largest governmental fleet overall. I think we have the biggest one even compared to counties in the state overall. All of our fleet services are administered by one department, which is appropriately called City Fleet. So that organization does everything from long range inventory planning about what equipment is needed, which bureau is needing it, all the way to specs and procurement, maintenance and repair, to disposition. So the full life cycle of the asset. The other thing City Fleet does, and I don't know if this is standard or non-standard for fleet organizations, is we manage all of the fueling for the vehicles. So we actually own and operate a couple of liquid fueling stations. And so of course the big question, and I think Chris hinted at this, is what about charging? Who owns and operates that? And that's been a big question for us and a big barrier, as you'll see in this presentation, about how do we convert the fleet. The City of Portland, I think we're well known for setting aggressive climate goals, usually trying to also apply an equity lens to that. And that's actually fairly important. When I think about equity initiatives, which the City of Portland is very dedicated to, there's often a component part of it which relates to costing and pricing for customers. So, if we spend limited funds irresponsibly, that means we're not investing in things that are appropriate for taxpayers and prudent for taxpayers, and those investments just get kicked down the road. So there's intergenerational equity issues if you don't invest in the right things. And so one of our jobs, or one of my goals as the director of City Fleet, has been to really strike a balance between socially progressive ideas and also this notion of stewarding taxpayer dollars, so that we're balancing these decisions and thoughtful about decisions and not just chasing the next new exciting thing. I think any of us who have done a substantial amount of capital planning in any infrastructure organization, there's always the next new thing. For a while it was seismic, then it's climate. So there's always something exciting to invest in, and our goal is to help achieve social change, but to do so in a just and equitable way that's thoughtful about taxpayer dollars. So we have aggressive goals, but we also have this balance that we have an obligation to strike. And then we're trying to implement all of these ideas in what I would say is a fairly complicated implementation environment that, frankly, I think is fairly unique to the city of Portland. The city of Portland is the last major city that still has a commission style of government. So we do not have a city manager. And what that effectively means is that all of our bureaus are like independent corporations. And so we have one centralized fleet provider that has to provide services to 26 different bureaus, some of which have very small, if almost non-existent fleet needs, some of which have huge needs for dump trucks and sweepers and so forth. So everybody has different needs, different operating environments, and perhaps most confoundingly for me is that they have very different perceptions of their autonomy and authority to make decisions about the direction and development of their fleets. So that's the environment we're operating in, and it's relatively complex to do coherent planning in. With that, we did manage to hire our first analyst about, I guess, last December. We finally got that into the budget. And so we are able to now actually develop a strategic plan and program for our green fleet. So we have certain goals that I would say are externally facing or sort of more publicly oriented, related to emissions reductions, related to public health and equity. But because of our city structure, we also have to have some goals that serve the bureaus in particular. So we cannot compromise the reliability of the vehicles as they come on board and we convert. If we did that, we would tank all of our credibility internally. So that affects both vehicles, but also charging and what we do with that. And then we have to make sure that we're delivering real value, so that from that taxpayer standpoint, we're making the right choices in terms of balancing innovation and balancing risk and direct costs. Overall, we're trying to improve operations as we proceed. So this has been just internally an opportunity to innovate on processes and acquisitions protocols. And then overall, we see ourselves as a potential catalyst in the region because of our size. So not only do we want to try to create a national model for how to do work, but also very specifically regionally, when we do work, we want to see that work benefit other quasi-municipal entities like TriMet, which is the Regional Transit Authority, other cities, et cetera. Whatever we do, we want to try to create a beneficial stream for others. So these are our primary objectives. Within that notion of the balancing act, we realized early on that we had these competing entities that we were trying to serve. So we have, you see a green tranche here. We have folks who are really interested in climate, and that's the only thing that they think about, and they want new stuff right when it comes off the presses, and they want it fast. And then you've got, frankly, the bureaus, and you've got maybe folks who are a little more expenditure minded, and they don't really care about these social goals. What they're worried about is risk, like, is the vehicle going to fail? Am I going to be able to charge it? And how much is this going to cost me? And so really, if you look at that orange group, you have these two competing entities, social progress and prudent stewardship of funds. And so what we realized at some point is that we really had to strike a balance between these two legitimate but competing priorities. So we looked at vehicle lifecycle costs. So that's acquisitions, maintenance, and then fuel costs. And that's, I think, a big topic for regulators to think about, is this fueling notion. And we looked at that in relation to carbon emissions. And we said, there's kind of three trajectories we could take. We could do fast and furious, we could do slow and lazy, but we could probably strike a balance in here somewhere that's both fiscally and socially responsible. So what you see in the middle, the gray path, is kind of what we think we're going to be doing. And that's an aggregation of all of our vehicle classes when we think they're going to come to market, but also be reliable, and how much we think they're going to cost and emit. And so we have a pathway that will change as things come to market or innovations happen or things get cheaper. But broadly speaking, we believe that we can be at net zero by 2039, which is 10 years in advance of the 2050 goal that was set for us by council. We could go faster, but again, there's risks, costs there, everything from vehicles failing to manufacturers going out of business. Those are risk costs that we just cannot assume and maintain credibility with the bureaus. We just can't do that. We would tank our credibility if we brought things in that they couldn't use or that failed or that we couldn't support. So we feel like this is for us a reasonably good economic balance of all of these competing priorities. So what I want to go into, because I think this is what might be interesting from the regulator standpoint, is what comprises EV fueling costs. So I think most of you are fairly familiar with life cycle costing. Within that, there's acquisitions, there's maintenance and repair, and there's fuel. So this fuel component, and I think Chris also hinted at this, this is huge. So fuel costs really are comprised of three things. There's the infrastructure backbone, which is the extension from the distribution system to the charger. There's the charging equipment itself, and then there's the fuel, the electrons. And the challenges here are really in the first two, although electrons have a little bit of challenge as well. So, and I've had people ask us, I've had the mayor ask, we've had lots of folks say, why aren't you converting faster? What's going on? Like, what's the barrier? And the barrier is that there are certain component parts of this charging that market wants to do, and there are certain component parts that market doesn't want to do. So this first one, this connection from the distribution system to the charger, at least in my experience, this is where market doesn't want to act. It's a risky space to work. It's sometimes underground. You open up the ground and you don't know what you're going to find. And so it's very hard to bid on this work. It's very hard to understand what your costs are going to be if you're going in as a free market business to forecast profit. And so in my experience, this space, unless you're working in brand new development territory, some sort of greenfield, and you can do it in advance. If you're going through to retrofit something, this is a really hard space to work in, and I haven't seen a lot of market action in this space, and so therefore it doesn't exist. And so if it doesn't exist, you're not converting your fleet. The second piece of this is the charger itself. So I think this is what people are relatively familiar with. It's the pedestal, it's the equipment, you plug it into the vehicle. But for us, the challenge as a municipality is that we don't really have the staff and resources to own and operate that kind of asset base. We're already struggling with our fuel stations, innovating and bringing on another labor force, another set of technologies, worrying about data security. That is like way beyond us. So we know we're not going to do number one and we're not going to do number two, but then the question becomes, well, who does do it? And then the third piece is the fuel. And for us, it's really a bureau cost input, which is they want the fuel pricing to be stable and they want it to be affordable, if not cost neutral. There are some benefits here. We're in that total cost of ownership profile. EVs tend to be less expensive to maintain. So if we have a little bit of fluctuation in pricing for any of these pieces, that's okay. But the overall fuel cost input into our business case, it can't be overwhelming or no one's going to do it. So from a fleet conversion standpoint, these three things are very significant for us. They're as significant as the development of EV vehicles themselves. So just to go into this a bit more, make ready, I talked about this. This is the first item. It's risky, it's expensive for market to build, or it's expensive and risky for market to build. We don't really feel like very many market actors are interested in this space. And so the question for us as we went into our most recent, the True Green Fleet endeavor over the last year and a half is this a space that could be utility owned? This is where this is what regulation exists for. This is what a utility is to take on expensive, risky work, and then to socialize those costs in an appropriate way, in a reviewed way, where these investments are prudent and beneficial to ratepayers, but you don't have certain geographies or certain locations where the costs were so high that it blew everybody's mind. And so you don't have action in those spaces. So to us, this really seemed like this is what a utility is for, particularly when you get the benefit of public review through the regulatory process. And so the first was, could this be utility owned? And then the second was, well, what's the rate base? So what is the appropriate way to socialize these costs? And that was really, frankly, for the OPUC, Oregon Public Utility Commission, to figure out, not us. But what we hoped for was some sort of equitable way to do this. So we didn't want to see residential payers, particularly low income customers, subsidizing anything that our fleet needed to do. But we also recognized the fact that we needed a way or some sort of rate base, something to socialize costs and risks. So for this, I do want to commend again, Portland General Electric, which is one of our utilities. We also have Pacific Power. PGE really innovated. Actually, they first tried to do a line extension program, and there were some methodological problems with that. And actually, Eric Sherman can probably speak to you more about that, which is that it was location based, I think is the nature of the problem. And so the question was, well, are the assets that are going to be installed in that location going to create the benefit that would offset the cost in that location? And I think from a line extension standpoint, it was just really hard to get the data and to understand the benefit streams. It was all fairly new in terms of how do you use existing cost effectiveness methodologies in order to assess these locational benefits. Eric, if I'm misspeaking, please correct me, but that was the crux of the problem, is it just didn't fit the method with the program that was being advocated for. Ultimately, PGE, who is a good partner in this and provided a lot of technical assistance, went in the direction of a program, which is they made available a pool of funds, which would then allow for some of those variable geographic and locational risks to potentially be absorbed, and then fleets could enter and apply for entrance to the program. So working all together in this kind of strange and innovative way with strange bedfellows at times, we ultimately, the OPUC approved for PGE this Make Ready pilot program, and then we applied for the opportunities in that program, and we have 3 locations at which we're developing fleet charging infrastructure. I do want to note, from a regulatory standpoint, we have a challenge, which is that a good portion of our territory is actually in PAC's territory, Pacific Power, and they have a different program going on, which is a little bit more confusing. So from a consistency of fleet development standpoint, these geographical pieces really do matter from a customer standpoint. But right now we're rowing with the oars that we've got. This is enough for us to at least start testing out some of these concepts. And it's our hope overall that it's not just the city that benefits. We would like to see TriMet benefit. If there's a Fred Meyer, which is a local retailer, if they want to have a fleet conversion project, we're hoping that our work will benefit them, at least conceptually or methodologically. Other cities as well. It's not just about us. We're trying to lay the groundwork methodologically and programmatically for other entities as well. So Make Ready, I think this was a really good collaboration with the OPUC and with Portland General Electric. Second thing, I know this may not be as much of interest to regulators, but I'll just kind of blast through it. Charging equipment, that's the second piece of this. I know that we do not have the experience or resources to own and operate this. The O&M is a real thing. And in my opinion, I know that PGE was interested in maybe toying in this space, but it was not my opinion that they had, that they were best situated to do this. The smallest assets that they own are distribution transformers. Imagine that, like, broken into 7 parts further, right? So from my perspective, this is where, this is probably a true market territory, and we want them to compete. We want to get good pricing. We want them to change out aging infrastructure as it starts to come to end of life. We want them to win our business. So we actually put together a charging as a service RFP. The idea is that vendors will own and maintain these things for us, that we don't have to build the infrastructure ourselves. So we'll see what we get from that. The RFP is out for bid right now. And then lastly, fuel. So this is actual electrons. I do want to note, I've heard a lot about like time of use pricing and things like that. From a fleet standpoint, some of those ideas are really awesome. So for example, if we have first shift workers whose vehicles are parked for second and third shift, that would be potentially a really great time for us to charge up those vehicles. But we also have things like police vehicles, these hot cars that are, they go from officer to officer to officer. So they have no downtime at all. So some of those pricing concepts may not be as beneficial for us because the cars are constantly in use. Probably fast charging is our next frontier, especially as we look at like heavy duty and some things that have strange operational cycles from bureau operation standpoints. But we're not quite there yet. We're just happy to even be where we're at. And then some other interesting notes on fleets. So as you're dealing with fleets, I would note that geography and location really matter. So the bureaus, at least in our experience, they have their own kind of operational profiles of where they're working and when they're working. So trying to mesh up fleet operations with bureau operations is actually fairly challenging, even looking at things like utilization and the size of the fleet, which has a huge impact on emissions. The other, perhaps even more complex question would be fleet and facility planning. So when you're building this expensive infrastructure, it usually has to be at a site, and that site needs to be near the buildings in which they're processing their paperwork, et cetera. But buildings are really expensive. And so trying to get those things to co-locate in a permanent way is fairly challenging. Questions about co-locating with the public. Obviously that's ideal. We would all love to do that. But rightfully so, our police force indicated that they don't really see themselves parking police cars adjacent, to other vehicles at the mall or something. So it's a little bit more complex to administer than we would like. And then lastly, I know there's a lot of interest, particularly on the part of our council, in EVs as being part of this bigger social program, looking at resilience, batteries, microgrids, solar canopies, et cetera. We feel like this is complicated enough that we're actually just going to work incrementally to test out how fleet EV planning works and fleet operations work. And it's important to us that before we make claims about public benefit, that we've tested whether or not that's operationally true. And so that's pre-vetting that we do before ideas potentially even go from the utility to the regulator. This is at a high level, kind of the roadmap that we've taken. We were really stalled out, I would say, on moving forward because of the charging problem. And so we spent some time just assessing what we needed to do. We tried to find collaborative opportunities with the utilities. I discovered at some point in time that the city had never really engaged with the OPUC on its processes. It was more working at the legislative level. So from a regulator standpoint, if you're not seeing action on the part of your cities, it might be that they don't know about the regulatory process and how important it is. So finding collaborative opportunities was really important. We are now trying to optimize investment and make sure that our business cases are really strong. And as we sort of test and innovate, ultimately that's when we'll make policy based on stuff that we know we can implement and that we know will have benefit. So overall, achieving our goals for us, it requires really sound analytics. We have an internal business case that we have to advance as well. It's required innovations that at times were actually kind of uncomfortable, particularly considering competitive procurement requirements, but collaborating with the utility was absolutely essential in this situation. It's very important to us that we retain strategic and operational credibility. So that means that the bureaus our actual operators cannot have negative experiences with vehicles or be out looking for charging equipment and it doesn't work. That's not an option. And then of course we want to have the mayor and others out in front of us leading us forward. So all told, our real crux has been reliable vehicles, cost-effective fuel. If we can do those things, we're on the right path. I do want to give a couple of tips since this is a regulatory communication in some ways on things that I thought were very successful about our recent collaboration with PGE and the OPUC. The first is to remember we all have a common goal. So whether or not current cost effectiveness tests incorporate those goals or whether or not your mandate includes things like social or climate change or emissions reductions, at some point in time, we all have this obligation to serve the greater good in a cost-effective way. And so I think that that was something that was very helpful for us, is the OPUC having really being dedicated to that mission, whether or not it was codified in its mandate, was to think about how to help move this forward in an era where there wasn't a lot of data, there weren't a lot of tried and true tested processes. I just thought everybody did a great job coming to the table and extending themselves a little bit to achieve this sort of esoteric goal that we all knew was important, but maybe wasn't written down anywhere. The other thing within that, I would encourage folks to understand the potential of cities, which is that they can be these huge catalysts of opportunity, but also their reality. You know, I am not paid, there's no incentive for me to spend capital. In fact, I have no capital to spend. I have very few funds. And so somehow I'm supposed to achieve this social mission with no money. And so helping me achieve the mission as a city might help compel other action out there in society that then brings the money in. So, so just understanding that nature of a municipality, I think, is really important. I would definitely try to connect your desired outcomes with incentives. So what should be the utilities job? The utilities job should be to take on risky, capital intensive projects in which those risks and costs could be socialized in an equitable way, in a fair way, in a legitimate way across a rate base. Market should be there to compete and make things better. So thinking about outcomes and incentives, I think is really critical, and making sure that you have the right purview for the right different market actors is important. Making sure that you have legitimate stakeholder processes. I think the OPUC did a great job working with us in making sure that CUB was at the table, or Citizens Utility Board. CUB pushed back on some concepts and really helped the city actually sharpen its pencil in terms of what we were wanting and what we were asking for, and making sure that those equity lenses were applied. I really appreciated their input, and we actually took a step back and thought about what we were asking for, and, you know, is this fair? Are we doing the right thing? That's part of our mission as well. I appreciated people being willing to look at different models, approaches to solving the problem. Again, there was a line extension approach. It really didn't work. The data wasn't there to support it, but the OPUC was open to the idea. They had a solution, but ultimately PGE went in the direction of a pilot program that had many different assets in place, and that was just great to have that innovation there. And then the last thing is to work incrementally. There are a lot of claims about benefit, and there's a lot of work that has to happen to see if those claims are even true. But unless you start, you don't really know if they're true or not. So be open to incremental progress, but always mindful of the fact that at some point, if you have something valid, you need to take it to scale. And so, you know, don't be afraid to sort of experiment and test, I guess, as you try out new things. And I'm probably over time. I can't see the clock, so I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think those presentations were all super helpful, and it was great to get different perspectives in front of us today. So I wanted to switch it over to Commissioner Bocanegra for Q&A. I know we're close to our discussion time, but I think our speakers are able to stay on for a few more minutes to answer some audience questions if we have any.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, everybody. That was super helpful. I definitely took a lot of notes. I have some questions, but before I do that, I'd like to see if any of our working group members have any questions for the presenters about anything you heard or the processes that they've just described.
Oh, hello, can you hear me? This is Al Freeman, Michigan PSC staff.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious, the last presenter, you talked about how your CUB looked at some things from an equity perspective. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that, because that term gets thrown around a lot, but it'd be helpful to kind of know what criteria they used or you know, resources.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll give a stab at this, but I'm not a regulator, so Eric might need to correct me. I'm really happy he happened to be on the call today. So I think the challenge is that we were thinking, well, we're building out this charging infrastructure, and ultimately we want it to go to scale, whether it's for fleets or commercial entities or right of way in the public. Like, we want to see this happen, but there isn't a rate base there that pays for this. And so the idea was, well, could we be the leader in creating maybe a new rate base? And I think where the CUB pushed back and had a very nuanced and detailed understanding of rate making that we didn't have was understanding that when you have these capacity upgrades to the distribution system to help accommodate whoever it is that's coming onto the system, there is some very small component part that will get charged to residential ratepayers. some of whom are low income. And so CUB was able to push back on the line extension concept, which was originally what was proposed, saying that's just not fair, even if it's just a couple of cents. It is unacceptable for low income residential ratepayers to subsidize commercial EV build outs or fleet EV build outs. We encourage you to take a different approach. And so that's where we got to this sort of more programmatic approach. But I might have said that completely incorrectly, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Maty, I think you did a good job of summarizing that up. If anyone wants to look at the comments that the Citizens Utility Board filed, the docket is advice, ADV 1149, and you can find that on our website.
Thank you, Al, for that question. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, observations?
Hi, this is Hannah Terwilliger with the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. We see pretty good involvement from our largest city, the city of Minneapolis, in commission work. But I've noticed that one of the issues is they have, a very specific kind of regulatory person who is situated in their, I think, sustainability or similar department, but they don't necessarily have a lot of this technical expertise that I think you obviously have, Maty, about how fleets operate. And so when we get comments in from them, they're very conceptual, they're very high level. And we would really like to see more involvement from, the fleet operators, but you don't want to be going around different parts of the city. So do you have suggestions on how to make sure you're actually involving and getting input from the correct portions of a city, especially with transportation electrification proceedings?
Yeah, and so first off, I'll say I've actually never run a fleet before or a facilities organization. I came from PGE, where I helped build the grid mod program. So I happened to come to the city to run this big organization with an asset management purview, but I happened to have gone through a bunch of regulatory experiences. So the city of Portland actually had nobody who participated in the regulatory process. They only worked on legislation. So I was like, well, there's a glue thing. I mean, regulation is really important if you're going to do anything for building electrification or EVs. So we have to get engaged in this. So I've brought that together. It just happened to work that way. But I would say what I notice in the city as sort of a third party observer is that we actually do have something similar. We have this government affairs group that really only dealt with legislation. They really still don't have a regulatory person. I'm just doing this ad hoc. You've got a Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that deals at the policy level and makes big ideas come about. And then you've got implementers. And there's this massive divide between the conceptual theory of what should be happening at a policy or sort of vision level and implementation. So even within the city, our city itself, that divide was never bridged until, I don't know, I think we just kind of bullied our way through and said, hey man, you keep passing these policies that we don't even have an analyst, and you've passed a climate action plan. Where is the climate? Where is it? And there was no implementation plan for the climate goals that the city had set because there was no analyst, there was no operational feedback. So I don't exactly know how to help you hack the city of Minneapolis, but what I might do is communicate to the city that it would be beneficial for them to bring their operators to the table in planning. And that is probably something that I would speculate their operators themselves would really appreciate. It's very hard to have people pass policy for you that you have no hope of implementing. It works a lot better when people talk to each other. So I would suggest you ask them to meet with their fleet organization, ask to meet with their fleet manager. And then we ourselves have a disconnect between fleet and the bureaus. We don't know, we have deep concerns about the level of utilization of the vehicles. So I don't want to do some analysis that says it's great to convert an EV when they don't even drive the damn thing. I want to just not own it at all. And so there's all these levels of disconnect that are possible. And I think it's just kind of understanding that landscape, and maybe in your position of influence demanding that you be allowed to at least talk to the fleet manager.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah, for that question. I have a couple questions, unless anybody else, feel free to jump in or raise your hand at any time. The question I have is for Cher. What sort of interfacing did you guys do, or do you do as part of the Electrification Coalition with the distribution utility? I know that you mentioned you worked with Atlas, and you have everything from fleet analysis, inventory to best practices, but where along that process might the utility become involved?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of times when we work with fleets, especially in like larger and more densely populated cities, we really encourage, and you know, the city management, the fleet manager or sustainability manager, they're interested in fleet electrification. They're interested in building out charging infrastructure across the city at various sites. You know, we can help them pinpoint which sites would be good for charging station development, and we can provide best practices and case studies on how other municipalities did it. But in the end, it always still comes back down to you got to engage with your utility company. You know, there might be specific rates that you're not aware of, or specific programs where they can assist with the either the make ready or you know, some kind of rebate. So I mean, that is honestly the number one piece of advice that we give fleets who are thinking about electrification.
Just to add to that, Cher, I thought it was, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Just to quickly add that Electrification Coalition has worked to place an individual in our local utilities EV department, so to speak. And I think that collaboration of Place-Based Foundation and other philanthropy helping to add capacity to a utility or to a city that's focused on electrification goes a really long way. That whole program around the electrified dealership program, a number of the outreach efforts that we've been doing have been centered around that position that was created in partnership with Electrification Coalition. So there is some precedent there where they have capacity in utilities helping them through the process.
That's good to know. Thank you. Joey, I think you had a question. You want to jump in?
It was a follow-up to your question, Commissioner, and I think Chris might have answered part of it, because I found that drive tool when you were Cher, when you were talking about that, to be very intriguing, and it kind of jogged in my memory a recent presentation by one of our utility companies looking to help companies in Maryland and other organizations, and I would say municipalities too, include them to try to transition their fleets, you know, with an eye towards, you know, fleet electrification. And the initial, I guess, two-step phase was like at a high level assessment of the current state of, you know, one's fleet. And then from there, you could take a much deeper dive, and that's a service that the utility would provide. But now with this, with that drive tool, I thought it was curious whether or not, you know, that drive tool is available to the public, or if it's offered as a software as a service, or if it's proprietary to, you know, the Electrification Coalition. And then, you know, would there be sort of like a partnership where that tool could be used or referenced, kind of with the whatever, you know, let's say the utility wants to at some point offer some sort of evaluation, assessment, consultation to help, you know, a city transition their fleet.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joey. So the drive tool, I had the URL for where you can find the tool on the Electrification Coalition's website. But I think if you just search for it, I think it's because it was developed in partnership with Atlas Public Policy. I think it's also hosted on their website as well. So it's free to use. You can go to their website and download it. It'll be a little, it'll be like a spreadsheet, but basically when you open up the spreadsheet and you have to like enable all the custom content in the sheet. But when you double click it, the dashboard will come up and it'll be basically like a little wizard, and it'll take you through and you can import your data, and it'll show you it'll bring it up in the Power BI dashboard, etc. You know, it does come with a manual that's very helpful because, again, it's a very modular, extensively customizable tool, but it can be, oh, thank you, Chris. It can be very overwhelming for staff that are not familiar with a lot of the different customizations that you can tweak. So we are at the Electrification Coalition putting the final touches on like a fee-for-service type of offering that we can provide for cities. Usually we do provide the drive analyses free of charge to cities who are participating, or the larger cities that are participating in the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative. But we are we realize that this tool can be, it's very helpful if you have some guidance when you're using it, which is what we can provide. So we're trying to figure out how we can effectively offer that to cities, because it is time consuming, and we want to make sure that we can just be compensated for our time. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joey.
It's great to hear that utilities are trying to do that proactive step at analyzing maybe a corporation's fleet and trying to get them to move in that direction. That's a great service. Might need to talk to my utility about that.
So Chris, this question is actually for you.
Okay.
I have more, but in the interest of time, because I know we have to move to our closed session, I wanted to ask you, what sort of resources did the city use for the charging station planning and deployment as opposed to the fleet planning, or was that kind of a one-stop shop when you guys did your the fleet study?
So when we did the fleet study, that was kind of a separate stream of work versus the charging infrastructure that we did. And so we looked at our fleet analysis. We really analyzed which departments, as I mentioned, had good use cases economically to make the transition over to an electric, whether they had long dwell times, whether the overall range on a daily basis was suitable for an EV, so on and so forth. And we're able to find a suitable alternative. So that's what the drive study provided for us. And it actually detailed out a roadmap moving forward between now and 2030 as to which departments and when we're going to begin to make over that transition to hit the ultimate goal of 100% alternative fuel and electric by 2030. We anticipate probably over half of those vehicles in the alt fuel goal to be CNG at this point in time, and the rest being electric. And then on the infrastructure side, one thing I didn't mention is a partnership with our utility where they have a commercial on-bill financing program for EVSE, for EV supply equipment and charging infrastructure. And so essentially what they can do for any business or even institution like the city is that they will make the upfront investment and charge on the utility bills over a 5-year period, including O&M in that charge and network services. And so basically we're now incrementally paying an OpEx versus a CapEx, and we're able to shift that over to mitigate the upfront cost for that. So it's a fantastic service. We did that same thing with our transit authority. And I do believe utilities are going to start to look at that, charging as a service as a potential, way to offset a lot of what Maty and Cher were mentioning earlier.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have, unless the group has any other questions. All right. Well, I think, Jasmine, I think at this point we move into closed session.
Yep. Yeah. So I want to thank our speakers again for being here today. I think this is a great discussion. Definitely good luck with all of your efforts, and I'm sure we'll be very aware of what's going on. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I appreciated the time today.